Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Today's tale of lawyer crime is a relatively recent case. It's the story of Alex Murdaugh from South Carolina. And it's sort of a long story, so I'm just going to get right into it. The only thing I'm going to say today is, if you wouldn't mind, please go rate the podcast and leave us a comment wherever you listen to podcasts. Give us 5 stars, say something nice. It really does help us get noticed by other listeners. Thanks very much, everyone, and enjoy today's episode. My younger brother vomited all throughout Les Mis. You know the Broadway show Les Miserables? My brother puked during the entire performance. We went to see the show for his 21st birthday. It was a gift that my parents bought him. But he was out partying with his friends so late and so hard the previous night that he was incredibly hungover during the performance. I think he might have still been drunk from the night before. Me and my other siblings watched the show and enjoyed it, but he was in the bathroom praying to the porcelain god the entire time. The story of Les Mis was based on a book written by Frenchman Victor Hugo. The story took place decades after the French Revolution, an upheaval that promised liberty, equality, and fraternity. Hugo's entire novel was an indictment of how thoroughly France had failed to deliver on the promises that were made during that revolution decades earlier. Why had liberty failed to take root in France? It was a question that many Frenchmen were pondering at the time. Not only Victor Hugo, but also a politician named Alexis de Tocqueville. In fact, the question was gnawing at de Tocqueville so much that it drove him to make a trip. In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville sailed to the newly formed United States of America on a quest. He was trying to figure out if democracy could actually work anywhere. De Tocqueville ended up writing one of the most studied works of political science, and it was called Democracy in America. It was a book that tried to explain why democracy was actually working in North America. And what I find most interesting about this book is not the political science stuff. It's what he had to say about lawyers. In chapter 16 of his book, de Tocqueville explained how he believed that lawyers were the closest thing that the young American nation had to nobility. He wrote, "The special information that lawyers derive from their studies ensures them a separate rank in society, and they constitute a sort of privileged body in the scale of intellect. This aristocratic character, which I hold to be common to the legal profession, exists more distinctly in the United States and in England than in any other country. This proceeds not only from the legal studies of the English and American lawyers, but from the nature of the law and the position which these interpreters of it occupy in the two countries." And then de Tocqueville said the key part. He said, "In America, there are no nobles or literary men, and the people are apt to mistrust the wealthy. Lawyers, consequently, form the highest political class and the most cultivated portion of society." Only 40 years after Alexis de Tocqueville made this observation, a man was born in South Carolina who would soon prove that de Tocqueville knew exactly what he was talking about. South Carolina, particularly the Charleston and Beaufort areas, has a unique geological feature. The area sat on one of the richest phosphate deposits in the world. It was a thick layer of fossil-bearing rock that had accumulated over millions of years in ancient shallow seas. In the mid-1800s, someone made a discovery. Phosphate was a great fertilizer, and that was a big deal in an agricultural state. When phosphate's value as a commercial fertilizer became understood, the state essentially became the Saudi Arabia of agricultural chemistry. And a man named Josiah Putnam Murdaugh II cashed in. Josiah made a fortune in phosphate mining and the commercial fertilizer industry in Charleston County, South Carolina. Like all good businessmen, he later put a bunch of that money into real estate, and he used some of his other money to pay for his son's education. Josiah's son Randolph would go to college and then law school at the University of South Carolina. And when he was done with school, Randolph Murdaugh Sr. would prove Alexis de Tocqueville right by becoming part of the South Carolina aristocracy. And it happened swiftly. Murdaugh opened a law office in the area known as the Low Country of South Carolina in 1910. The Low Country is that area along the South Carolina coast that runs from the Charleston area all the way down to the Georgia border. Randolph's office was in Hampton, South Carolina, and while it was only a one-man firm, it was a powerhouse. Local legend holds that he never even had to put a sign on the outside of his office because everyone knew who he was and where you could find him. Randolph was doing well. He had an education and he had his father's fortune, and now he had a thriving law practice. The only thing to add was political power. So 10 years after he started his firm, Randolph Murdaugh did just that. He got himself elected as the solicitor for the 14th Judicial Circuit. That's basically the criminal prosecutor for the area. But that area was huge. The 14th Judicial Circuit was a 5-county swath of South Carolina's Low Country. Randolph Murdaugh Jr. had become the law of the land. And at that point, the guy had it all. He represented wealthy, influential clients in his private practice, and he went after sensationalized criminals in his capacity as prosecutor. And his personal life was high profile too. He and his wife were consistently talked about in the society pages. Over the next 30 years, Randolph Murdaugh flexed his power, and he did it often. Nobody in the Low Country got elected or appointed without his approval. If you spoke up against the family, you'd likely have a hard time making ends meet. Yeah, there were sure to be consequences, so the best course of action would be to keep your mouth shut and do what the Murdaughs tell you to do. And that's probably why every time Randolph Murdaugh was up for re-election as prosecutor, no one opposed him. And that is how family dynasties are built. On July 18, 1940, Randolph Murdaugh Sr. left his house to go play cards with friends. While he was returning home at 1 o'clock in the morning, his car mysteriously stopped on the train tracks. No one knows why, but it stopped right there on a railroad crossing. Murdaugh got out of the car and probably stared down the tracks. That would make sense because at the time his vehicle stopped, a freight train owned by the Charleston and Western Carolina Railway was heading towards him. He surely heard the locomotive in the distance. Murdaugh was drinking with his friends that night, so he was probably sporting a little bit of buzz while standing on those tracks. The train conductor watched attentively as his engine barreled down the tracks. The night was steamy, so even though he was looking straight ahead, his visibility was restricted. But while the conductor's view might have been obscured, Randolph Murdaugh's was not. Murdaugh stood on the tracks, defiantly watching the lights from the train get closer. He was boldly listening to the rumble of the engine get louder. The conductor didn't see Randolph's car until he was about 40 yards away. And while he was surely startled to see the vehicle on the tracks, the car itself wasn't the strangest part of the scene. The conductor noted that as the train approached the vehicle, Randolph Murdaugh was waving at the train. Not frantically flailing his arms, casually waving at the train. The massive locomotive smashed directly into the car, and it threw the vehicle 900 feet up the tracks. And it killed Randolph Murdaugh instantly. To this day, no one knows why the car stopped. No one knows why Murdaugh so casually stayed with the car. Was it suicide? There's no reason to think so. It makes absolutely no sense. Randolph Murdaugh Sr. was local royalty. He had a thriving practice, a safe political position, and a family that was the envy of everyone who knew him. You know what I think? I think Randolph Murdaugh thought he could stop that train. I mean it. Think about who he was. He was the king of the Low Country. He was rich, intelligent, and a political powerhouse. He was basically untouchable. So maybe, after playing cards and possibly drinking with his buddies all night, Randolph Murdaugh might have been fueled by a little liquid courage. No one ever proved that he was drinking that night, but it's not exactly unusual for a bunch of guys to get together all night playing cards and, well, imbibe a little bit. Maybe there was booze coursing through his veins, and maybe that made him think, I am a Murdaugh. And if I put my hand up, that conductor will see it, and he'll slow down, because I am a Murdaugh, and a Murdaugh can do anything. Even stop a train. That kind of hubris wouldn't be such a stretch, do you think? When Randolph Murdaugh Sr. died, his son, Randolph Murdaugh Jr., known as Buster, he assumed his father's position as prosecutor in that part of the Low Country. Buster Murdaugh filled the aristocratic shoes that his father had left, and he would not be the last of the Murdaugh dynasty to lead the Low Country. Over the years, descendant after descendant of Randolph Murdaugh would succeed one another as prosecutor of the area. A Murdaugh would hold the position for 86 years. Alexis de Tocqueville, the Frenchman who wrote about the young American democracy in the mid-1800s, when he wrote about lawyers as aristocracy, he was writing about the Murdaughs. And, like all royalty, as time went on, their status in the Low Country society elevated, their political power grew, and so did their fortunes. The family controlled political and economic life in that part of South Carolina for nearly a century. And it was during his family's almost 100-year reign as the de facto ruler of the Low Country that Patriarch Randolph Murdaugh Sr.'s great-grandson would be born. Alex Murdaugh could have been a movie character. Everything I read about the guy makes it seem like he would have been the perfect bully in any teen movie from any era, ever. You know, the kid who came from money, wore super preppy clothes, drove an expensive car that his parents bought for him, walked through the high school halls with his nose in the air like his shit didn't stink. You know who I mean. That's exactly the kind of person that Alex Murdaugh seems to have been. Richard Alexander Murdaugh was born on May 27, 1968. Known simply as Alex, he was born into South Carolina aristocracy. He was the latest in the long line of Murdaugh men that descended from the OG Randolph Murdaugh Sr. And the thing about Alex was that he knew he was royalty. One independent journalist said, according to those who knew him personally from a young age, Alex Murdaugh was eminently aware of what it meant to be a Murdaugh in South Carolina. In high school, he played football and was named prom king. He was popular, though some schoolmates had some unkind things to say about him. One described Alex as unchained. That makes sense. His status as a Murdaugh made it a certainty that he'd never have to be held accountable for anything. His family ran the entire area for 100 years like it was their own little fiefdom. And that's why, like the kings and princes of the Low Country that came before him, Alex Murdaugh had it all. He went to college and then law school at the University of South Carolina. He got married to the former Maggie Kennedy Brandstetter. They had 2 boys, Paul and Richard, though Richard was given the family nickname Buster. As you'd expect, Alex went into the family law firm too. And yes, it was the same firm that was started as a one-man shop by his great-grandfather in 1910. But by the time Alex had become partner, the firm had expanded significantly. It was now called Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Ellsroth, and Detrick. And it was a powerhouse firm with offices in multiple counties, more than a dozen attorneys, and more than 50 employees. Alex had some interesting cases. One of Alex's first clients was a guy named Curtis Smith, who was injured in a logging accident. He was so banged up that he was left permanently disabled and couldn't work. Curtis needed to be fixed up both physically and financially. For the physical issues, Curtis went to doctors who removed 3 discs in his back and inserted a whole bunch of hardware in their place. For the financial issues, he went to Alex Murdaugh. Murdaugh helped Curtis secure a financial result that would take care of the injured man. And the lawsuit was the start of a lifelong friendship between Curtis Smith and Alex Murdaugh. But at the time they forged that relationship, neither man would have believed where it would ultimately lead. Alex's law practice just sort of moved along fine. In fact, his entire life just sort of moved along fine. Alex Murdaugh never had any real problems. As a youngster, everything was simply given to him. As he got older, he knew he'd go to college and law school. And when he was done, he never worried about finding a job. And he knew that when he started to practice law, his practice would be successful. It was all preordained and virtually guaranteed. Alex Murdaugh's success was a sure thing. But that sort of privilege has a downside that most people don't see coming, and it hit Alex Murdaugh like a freight train. After starting that family and pursuing a successful legal career, Alex must have then felt something strange, a feeling in his soul that he'd never experienced. Not in his well-financed youth, not in his college football playing days, not when he was courting his soon-to-be wife. In the early 2000s, Alex Murdaugh seems to have gotten bored. I think Alex Murdaugh got bored. I mean, think about it. Throughout his entire life, he was treated like the crown prince of the Low Country. He didn't want from anything, and he never had to go out and get anything. Everything he ever needed was just dropped at his feet. But once he hit the 10-year mark in his law practice, there was nothing else for him to be given. His name and his connections gave him a full life, a good job, respect in the community, and financial success. At that point, the only thing for Alex Murdaugh to do was work. And that was probably super boring for a preppy, privileged former jock. So what does a spoiled rich kid do when he's bored? He gets into trouble. In 2005, Alex Murdaugh did just that, because that was the year that he started to steal from his clients. Here's how he did it. When Murdaugh represented a personal injury client and settled a matter, the proceeds of that settlement would be paid into the firm's trust account. The lawyer who worked on that file is then supposed to disperse those funds in accordance with the settlement agreement. Part goes to pay off debts associated with the case, like doctors or experts. Some go to the lawyers for their fees, and the majority goes to the client. When it comes to that legal fee, the money is supposed to actually first go into the law firm's bank account. Then the firm distributes part of the money to the lawyer who worked on the file and then keeps the rest for the firm operations. But when it came to Alex Murdaugh's cases, he never gave his firms those fees. Instead, he just kept the money for himself. How did he accomplish that? He had a few accomplices. One guy was a lawyer Alex knew for years. In fact, the guy was the godfather to one of Alex's sons. In one case they worked on together, Alex's housekeeper slipped and fell in their home. She hit her head, and unfortunately she passed away. Alex arranged to have the housekeeper's family represented by that lawyer who Alex knew for years. And when the case was finally settled with the insurance company, Alex and the lawyer conspired to just keep the settlement funds for themselves. But why did Alex Murdaugh do all of this? Why engage in a life of theft? There was no reason for him to do it. There was no objective reason for Alex Murdaugh to start to steal from his clients. He didn't need the money. Okay, there was one thing he might have needed money for. Murdaugh said that he had knee surgery to repair an old football injury and that after the procedure he got hooked on pain pills. Oh, and who was the guy who got him those drugs? His old client, Curtis Smith. Friends help friends, right? But the man was a successful attorney trying and settling cases for millions of dollars. Unlike the stereotypical drug addict, Alex Murdaugh probably had the money to support his habit. There was no reason for him to steal from his clients to fund the addiction. So if he wasn't stealing to fund his addiction, why was he doing it? I think Alex Murdaugh got bored and he was ungrateful. I think Alex Murdaugh was a rich little asshole. And I think that his life of privilege started to feel like a jail cell. The poor little rich boy was trapped inside a preordained life. Everything had been determined for him. Everything had been handed to him. Theft, however, probably gave him a rush. There was danger in theft. There was risk in theft. And the idea of risking everything with the possibility of losing it all, that was a feeling he'd never had in his entire life. Now, you combine that with an opioid addiction, and you have a volatile cocktail. The problem with theft is that once you start, it's really easy to justify doing it again. And the more you do it, the tougher it is to stop. Maybe that's why he kept on doing it. The lawyer accomplice of his helped him steal a lot from a bunch of different cases. And as Alex's crimes continued to grow in scope, so too did his opioid addiction. He ended up spending tens of thousands of dollars a week, and it started to show at work. Alex's paralegal noticed that he was starting to behave strangely. He showed up late for work, and his demeanor was just scattered. She gave her boss a nickname behind his back. She called him a Tasmanian devil, resembling that old cartoon character who was just all over the place. Murdaugh didn't just use that lawyer to help him steal. He had another accomplice, a banker friend of his. Alex Murdaugh did personal injury litigation, and in those types of cases in South Carolina, lawyers commonly use someone called a conservator. A conservator is a court-appointed fiduciary who's responsible for managing the financial affairs and settlement funds of an incapacitated person who's involved in litigation. When a case was settled, the settlement funds would be deposited into Murdaugh's law firm trust account. Alex would then tell his firm employees to write checks from those settlement funds to the conservator. They'd make the checks payable to Palmetto State Bank, which is where the conservator worked. But once Alex's banker friend received the money, he wouldn't spend it on behalf of the client. Instead, he set up another account which he labeled the Forge account. I don't know why he called it that, but that's what he called it. He would then take the money and deposit it there. Then he'd use the money in the Forge account to pay Alex Murdaugh's bills. He used funds to pay off personal debts, to buy cars, to make renovations to Alex's beach house, and even just gave back part of those funds in cash right to Alex. Alex Murdaugh's old lawyer friend and his banker friend weren't the only accomplices. Alex also used his old client and current drug dealer, Curtis Smith. Frequently, Alex would write checks from his trust account and then just have Curtis cash the checks and return the cash to Alex. Murdaugh had these various schemes running side by side. He was picking the pocket of a ton of clients and using multiple people to help him. That sort of theft is audacious, don't you think? I mean, he had to think that at some point someone would catch on. Stealing is one thing, but stealing so consistently and often with various accomplices, why would he do it? I think there's one more element. Beyond the issue of boredom, beyond being ungrateful, a critical other component that explained why Alex Murdaugh would be so brazen. And it's that I think Alex Murdaugh felt untouchable. He was a Murdaugh. If anyone tried to come down on him, he would do like his great-grandfather did. He would stand on the tracks as that freight train barreled toward him and simply tell it to stop. The night of February 23rd, 2019 began the way a lot of Saturday nights begin for 19-year-olds in the South Carolina Low Country. 3 couples got together for a night out. An oyster roast, a boat ride, the kind of evening that doesn't make news. Except that this one did. That night, Alex Murdaugh's son Paul used his older brother Buster's driver's license to buy alcohol at a convenience store. He then met the other teenagers he was going out with at the Murdaugh's family private property at the river, a place that locals called Murdaugh Island. There were 3 couples, Paul and his girlfriend, Paul's friend Connor and his girlfriend, and Connor's cousin with his girlfriend. That last girl was a young woman who just graduated from high school, 19-year-old Mallory Beach. The gang boarded a boat that was owned by Paul's father, Alex. The boat's cooler was freshly stocked with a whole lot of drinks that Paul just bought. Paul drove the boat and docked at Pawkey Island for an oyster roast at 8 o'clock that evening, and they stayed there till around midnight. After midnight, Paul pointed the boat toward downtown Beaufort. The river was dark and foggy, and Paul Murdaugh was drunk. The other teenagers on the boat asked Paul to let someone else drive, but he refused. They begged him to slow down. He refused. They asked to be let off the boat, and he refused that too. The others on the boat were pleading with him to slow down and stop, but he wouldn't. At 2:17 in the morning, the boat was screaming down the river. And while Paul's friends were unable to stop him from driving so fast, the Archers Creek Bridge was quite able to do so. Paul slammed into the foundation of the bridge, and the boat basically split in half. Mallory Beach was sitting on her boyfriend's lap at the moment of impact, and she was thrown into the dark water. Paul's friend Connor called 911. He said, "We're in a boat crash on Archers Creek. There are 6 of us, and 1 is missing." The kids on the boat were taken to the hospital. Connor had a broken jaw. His girlfriend's hand was badly injured. Interestingly, nobody administered a field sobriety test to Paul Murdaugh at the scene. Nobody took Paul Murdaugh into custody. The son of the most powerful legal family in Hampton County was transported to the hospital and treated like a patient, not a suspect. Paul was described by hospital staff as wearing only boxers, grossly intoxicated, and the most belligerent and uncooperative person in the emergency room. A blood draw was taken at 4 in the morning, and it showed that his blood alcohol content then was more than 3 times the legal limit. While most of those kids did go to the ER, Connor's cousin refused to leave the scene. He stayed at the water's edge and waited for his girlfriend Mallory to surface. When Alex Murdaugh got wind of what happened, he raced to the hospital. But instead of trying to console and care for the injured teenagers, Alex began work in the room. A nurse described him walking into the emergency room, introducing himself to staff, attempting to speak with every passenger from the boat, and even entering rooms where survivors were being interviewed by police. Connor later told the investigators that Alex told him he didn't need to tell anything to anyone about who was driving the boat. It was clear that Alex's lawyer instincts were kicking in. It was clear that he was trying to protect someone. The question is, whose interest was he actually trying to protect? While Alex Murdaugh was scheming over at the hospital, Mallory Beach was still in the water. They didn't find her that night. Nor did they find her over the next week, as search teams, rescue divers, boats, and a helicopter combed the waterways of the South Carolina Low Country. On March 3rd, 8 days after the crash, 2 volunteers found her body 5 miles downstream from where the boat had gone down. She suffered blunt force trauma and then drowned. Two months later, on what would have been Mallory Beach's 20th birthday, Paul Murdaugh was charged with 3 felony counts: boating under the influence resulting in great bodily harm, boating under the influence resulting in death, and a 3rd count of serious bodily injury to 2 passengers. He pleaded not guilty and was released on bond. His father's firm went to work. You would think that Alex Murdaugh would be completely consumed with his son's criminal case. Any parent would be, right? I mean, your son can go to jail. You'd do anything you had to do to protect him, wouldn't you? Well, Alex Murdaugh was certainly worried about his son's fate, but there was something worrying him even more. Shortly after criminal charges were brought against Paul, Mallory Beach's family filed a civil lawsuit as well. Now that's a separate suit. The criminal case against Paul was for boating under the influence. A conviction in that criminal case could put Paul in jail. But a civil lawsuit was about money. The family was suing for monetary damages that resulted from Mallory's death. That suit was, of course, filed against Paul, but it was also filed against someone else. A co-defendant in that suit was the person who owned the boat, Paul's father, Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh, the lawyer, knew why that civil suit was so dangerous. At some point during that litigation, Mallory Beach's family would start to probe the finances of the people they were suing. Paul Murdaugh, he wouldn't care so much, but Alex would. That's because if someone looked closely at Alex's finances, they would learn something that no one knew at the time. The theft of client funds that Alex Murdaugh had been perpetrating with those several accomplices, it had been going on for over 15 years. By the time that civil suit was filed, Alex Murdaugh and his lawyer friend had stolen $4.3 million. And by the time that civil suit was filed, Alex Murdaugh and his banker friend had stolen another $3.5 million. That's why Alex Murdaugh started to work the room that night in the emergency room. The lawyer in him could see into the future. He knew that a criminal case would not be the only result of the accident. He knew that a civil suit was going to come too. And he knew what that kind of case could expose. Alex Murdaugh was not about to let that happen. He went into protection mode big time. His approach was to drag his feet. The longer he could drag things out, the greater the chance that some saving grace would appear. The criminal case against Paul moved slowly through the courts, which is how a case moves in a county where the defendant's family has controlled the prosecutor's office for nearly a century. Alex also used his connection to delay the civil case. But Alex Murdaugh was probably feeling something that he had never felt before. I bet that this was the first time in the history of his life that Alex Murdaugh thought that he might actually have to answer for his actions. In fact, it seems like it's the only time in the history of his entire family's life that anybody seems to have had the possibility that they would have to answer for their actions. Up until now, their name, their status, and their stranglehold on everyone in the community, it always protected them. But this level of theft, wow, once that would be revealed, the Murdaugh name would not be able to protect Alex from those consequences. And that was something Alex Murdaugh never had to face in his life. Consequences. And the specter of facing those consequences, well, that can push powerful people to take some outrageous actions. And everything came to a head for Alex Murdaugh in the summer of 2021. In June of 2021, the Beach family's attorney filed a motion to compel Alex Murdaugh to open his books. They were asking the court to allow them to inspect all of his finances. Why? Well, that's what you do in a civil case. You establish that someone was responsible for an accident, and then you go after their money. To find out about that money, you issue information subpoenas, which are documents that request information about the person's finances. That person has to answer those subpoenas, or the court throws the book at you. You have to tell them what money you have and where it is, and if the judgment is ruled against you, the people who won that judgment can go after that money. The hearing requesting that information was scheduled for June 10th. While the criminal and civil cases were moving along, meanwhile, something unusual was happening back at Alex Murdaugh's office. His paralegal noticed something wrong with the files. It seems that some of the settlement fees for certain cases were just missing. At first, she thought that her boss simply misplaced some checks, but as Alex's behavior grew stranger, the paralegal got suspicious. She grabbed a file to look into things a little further, and when she did, a check fell out and floated to the ground. When she picked it up and looked at who it was written to, that's when it was confirmed to her that her boss, Alex Murdaugh, was stealing client money. She immediately told the firm's chief financial officer that something was very wrong. Alex Murdaugh knew that he didn't have much time left. The hearing for the wrongful death claim in the boat accident was only days away. He had resisted giving the plaintiffs access to his financial records for some time, but he knew that there would be no way to continue delaying once the hearing occurred. Meanwhile, Alex's opioid addiction was in full bloom. He was now paying tens of thousands of dollars a week for painkillers to his former client and now close friend, Curtis Smith. That addiction seems to have put such a strain on his family life that he and his wife were now separated. She was living at one of their other properties. All of this tension was combining in his head. The stress from everything was coursing through his brain. And just as his anxiety was reaching its peak, a single phone call pushed him to the apex. Alex Murdaugh got a call from the CFO of his law firm. She wanted to meet him immediately. On June 7th, 2021, the CFO from Alex Murdaugh's law firm knew she had to confront Alex. The CFO knew that she'd have to approach this meeting delicately. Like most people in the tightly knit low-country community, she had known Alex Murdaugh for years. For that reason, she surely intended to broach the topic gently, but as the meeting got started, Alex immediately jumped down her throat. "What do you need now?" he blurted out. The CFO was taken aback. She collected herself and got stern. She brought up the particular incident that had been brought to the firm's attention. They noticed, she explained, that in one matter, $792,000 in fees were never given to the firm. She asked Alex point blank, "What's the story? Either you have a check that wasn't turned into the firm, or that money was given directly to you. Which is it?" Alex made some excuses, but the CFO wasn't buying it. She told Alex straight up that she thought he took it. And her inclination was right. He did take it, and it was also already spent. While the CFO was focusing on the missing fees, Alex Murdaugh's mind was elsewhere. He simply could not stop thinking about that upcoming hearing. That hearing would be the end of the road for him. The CFO pushed Alex harder on the missing fees, but Alex just sort of waffled. She pressed him, he resisted. She pressed him, he resisted more. Finally, Alex insisted that the money for the fees was not stolen and that he could get it to her. And then he found a way to get himself out of that meeting. Alex's head was spinning. He was at the end of his rope. His position as low country royalty could no longer help him, and he couldn't drag that civil suit out anymore. The law firm was pressuring him about the missing fees. His head must have just felt as if it were being crushed by a vice. Alex Murdaugh knew that it was time for decisive action. The imminent threat was that civil suit. He had delayed as long as he could, hoping that some saving grace would descend upon him and stop the proceedings. Now he realized that if that saving grace was going to be delivered, he would have to be the one to deliver it. On the same day that Alex was confronted by his law firm CFO, his now estranged wife Maggie was relaxing at one of the couple's homes on Edisto Island. She was a little surprised when Alex contacted her and told her to come over to their hunting lodge. She hadn't planned on seeing Alex that day and probably didn't want to. But Alex's parents were ill and they weren't doing so well, and even though her relationship with Alex was on the rocks, she still felt a sense of responsibility to the man that she'd spent so many years with. So, reluctantly, she agreed to meet Alex at their hunting lodge known as Moselle. But Maggie felt that something was strange about the get-together. On the way over, she texted her sister saying that Alex sounds fishy and that it seemed that he was up to something. Despite that weird feeling, Maggie headed over to Moselle. She probably figured it's worth the trip. Forget Alex. Maggie probably realized that her son Paul would also be at Moselle. He was living there over the summer, and it was almost 7 p.m. He'd probably be coming home from his summer job soon. Alex, meanwhile, was at Moselle, probably pacing and setting things up. Alex figured that at some point his son Paul would make his way over to the dog kennels. They had one of Paul's friend's dogs there, so Paul was surely going to check it out. And then he thought about Maggie. They'd all probably eat dinner, then she'd mull around for a little while. Alex took it all in. He thought about it all, and then he arranged things. When Paul and Maggie got to the property, the evening unfolded exactly as Alex thought. They ate dinner as a family. Paul posted some pictures on social media. After dinner, Paul got a call from his friend, the friend whose dog was at the kennel. His friend said, "I'm a little worried about him, Paul. I think his tail is injured." So Paul told his friend that he'd head over to the kennel and take a video of the dog for him and send it over. He did just that. Paul headed over to the kennel and took a video of the dog. You can hear 3 voices in the background of the video: Paul, Alex, and Maggie. Paul sent the video to his friend and then FaceTimed him. It seemed that when Paul got on that call, Maggie had walked out of the kennel. Alex stayed with his son and followed him while he was on the call. He followed him when he hung up the phone, and he followed him as Paul walked into the feed room in the kennels. Alex bore down on the person who threatened to unravel all of his financial crimes. The person who got into the boating accident that caused the litigation that was about to expose all of Alex's bad deeds. At that moment, Alex knew that the only way to protect himself was to end that litigation. And the only way to end that litigation was to end the subject of the litigation. The fact that that person was also his son didn't seem to carry much weight. Paul might have heard his father's footsteps behind him. He probably wondered why he was following him so closely. And when Paul turned around to check things out, he was surely shocked by what he saw. His father was holding a shotgun, and it was pointed right at him. Shotguns don't shoot bullets. They shoot a group of metal pellets. Those pellets are called shot. That's why they're called shotguns. They don't call them shotguns because you shoot them. It's called a shotgun because they expel those pellets called shot when you fire them. When you fire a shotgun from far away, those pellets sort of disperse. But if you shoot it when you're right on top of something or someone, those pellets pretty much hit the same general area. And the force of the blast is devastating. Alex Murdaugh shot his son before Paul even finished turning around. The first shot hit Paul in his left chest and left arm. He didn't expect it at all, which explains why his arms were still at his side when he was shot. Some of the pellets pierced Paul's lungs, so he probably gasped for air. But he didn't have much time because Alex shot him again right away. The second blast hit Paul on his left shoulder, and it was at such a powerfully close range that the shot that came out of the gun went up through Paul's shoulder, into his neck, through his skull, and came out the other side of his head. Along with that shot were most of Paul's brains. Paul's face was still intact, because he was shot from the side. He probably didn't even get a chance to look at his father in the eyes. Maybe Alex Murdaugh did that purposefully. As this went down, Maggie was just outside the kennel. She probably heard the shots, but she might not have been overly concerned. After all, this was a hunting lodge in South Carolina where guns were going off all the time. She might have been curious about the shots, but she probably didn't think, hey, I wonder if my husband just murdered my son. There was no reason for her to suspect that. Maggie started to walk toward the kennel to see what was going on. Alex, having just killed his son, threw down the shotgun and headed toward Maggie. Maggie was walking in his direction, in the direction of the shots. But before she could get into the kennel to see what was happening, she was confronted by Alex. Alex was standing right in front of her, now holding a different gun. This time it was an assault rifle. Maggie didn't have any time to question what was going on because Alex immediately pumped 2 bullets into her. One in her stomach and one in her thigh. Maggie doubled over in pain and fell to her hands and knees. Alex circled around her, shooting again, this time hitting her wrist. Then, from only 3 feet away, Alex pumped a bullet into her head. He then walked around Maggie, faced her body, and put 1 more bullet into her skull. Maggie was face down in the grass. She died about 30 yards away from her son. The deed was done. Now it was time for Alex to cover things up. He grabbed his wife's cell phone and walked away from the body. He then stripped down naked, washed himself off with a garden hose, and changed clothes. Then he started to move around Moselle rapidly, likely disposing of the weapons, and he got into a golf cart and drove back to the main house. Alex got into his SUV. He was going to leave the property, but he sat in his driver's seat for a moment before he left. He wasn't contemplating the horror of what just happened. He was contemplating his alibi. That's why Alex took out his cell phone and called his wife Maggie's phone. Her phone display lit up, but he didn't answer. Later he'd argue that he couldn't find his wife, and that missed call was him looking for her. Alex put his SUV into drive and left the property. He texted 1 more message to Maggie saying, "Be right back." And then he put distance between him and Moselle. The OnStar on his car said that he was going as fast as 80 miles per hour on the small rural roads outside of Moselle. And at one point, while flying down the road, Alex opened his window and tossed Maggie's phone out of the car. Alex drove straight to his mother's house. Alibi. Her caretaker remembers Alex staying for a short while. The man who just shot and killed his wife and son sat at his mother's house and ate a bowl of ice cream for 20 minutes. Alex then sent a few more messages to Maggie's now discarded phone, messages that he knew his dead wife would never read. A half hour later, Alex went back to Moselle and played the role of distraught husband and father. He called 911 frantic. He was hysterical. "This is Alex Murdaugh," he cried. "My wife and child have been shot badly." He told the police that he returned home and found his wife and son shot dead near the dog kennels. But while the officers were investigating, before the bodies were even covered, Alex started talking about the boat crash and Paul getting threats. He was working the room again. This time, he was trying to build a narrative for his alibi right there in front of the cops. Over the next few hours, Alex would be interviewed by investigators. He told them he tried to roll the bodies over and that he tried to check for pulses. The only problem was that at the time he was being interviewed, he was wearing a clean white t-shirt and cargo shorts. First responders didn't see any blood on him when they arrived, and they didn't find any blood on his hands, clothing, or shoes. The cops made their reports. The crime scene was cataloged, and they moved on off the property. The murders were all anyone was talking about in the Low Country. But while everyone was focusing on the violence and they were focusing on the drama, The civil hearing in the Mallory Beach wrongful death lawsuit, the one that would have forced Alex to open his financial records, it was quietly canceled. And the financial subpoena disappeared with it. Over the next few days, Alex Murdaugh's family rallied around him. His brothers appeared on Good Morning America insisting that there was no way Alex was involved. The family presented a united front. They explained that they were both grieving and bewildered by what was happening. That united front included Alex and his surviving son Buster as well. They announced a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of whoever killed Maggie and Paul. Alex even released a statement. He said, "I want to thank everyone for the incredible love and support that we've received over these last few weeks. Now is the time to bring justice for Maggie and Paul." A month later, Alex Murdaugh's scheme paid off. The South Carolina Attorney General's office formally dropped all charges regarding the boating accident against his now deceased son, Paul. The case that had been threatening to expose Alex's financing for 2 years was officially closed. But all was not so rosy. Investigators working the murders started to believe that Alex was involved. And in August of 2021, they told him as much. Alex then pursued a familiar tactic: deny and delay. He denied having any role in the murders, and then he just let time go by, hoping for some saving grace to descend upon him. But instead of receiving a savior, Alex Murdaugh received another pursuer. Not only were the authorities investigating his role in the murders, but his law firm was also still investigating the apparent theft of fees from his clients. And 3 months after the murders, they took action. Alex was forced to resign from the law firm after partners say he misappropriated millions of dollars of client and firm funds. The legal dynasty that had carried the Murdaugh name for nearly a century officially severed ties with Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh realized that there was no hope left. The cops were after him, and now his law firm was after him, and it was just a matter of time before the entire practice of law was after him, because his law firm would surely report the theft of those fees, and he would likely be disbarred. So now he was a guy who had an expensive painkiller addiction, yet he was dangerously close to not having an income to be able to support that habit. And he probably also realized that once he was disbarred, he would have absolutely no way for him to make a living again. There was only one move left. And that's why he called his old friend, former client, and drug dealer, Curtis Smith. Alex told his friend, "It's all getting too much. I need your help. I need to see you right away." On the morning of September 4th, Alex Murdaugh met Curtis Smith in the parking lot of a funeral home. Murdaugh told his longtime friends that things just got all fucked up. And then he asked him, "Do you love me?" Smith said he loved him like a brother and he would do anything for him. And that is when Alex Murdaugh asked Curtis Smith to shoot him and kill him. In a warped kind of way, this scheme might be the only non-selfish thing that Alex Murdaugh had planned on doing for decades, because he was trying to take care of his surviving son, Buster. Alex had a $10 million life insurance policy, and Buster, as the last surviving relative, would be the beneficiary. The problem was Alex believed that the policy had a suicide exclusion. If Alex killed himself, Buster couldn't collect. So he needed someone else to do the job. When Alex asked Curtis to kill him, Curtis's immediate response was, "Ain't happening. Not today, not tomorrow. It ain't happening." But Alex wasn't giving in. He came to this meeting with a plan and a gun. And Murdaugh gave that gun to Smith and told him to follow him to Old Salkehatchie Road because he had everything planned out. Curtis was to come out there and shoot him dead. When the cops arrived, they'd see that there was a tire blowout, and they'd probably think that some stranger in a passing truck had committed a random shooting. It was the kind of story that, in Hampton County, well, people just seemed to simply accept. Alex Murdaugh drove his car out into the countryside. He got out and slashed his tire with a knife and then threw the folding blade into the nearby grass. Then he got in his car and waited for Curtis to show up. What happened next? It depends who you believe. Alex Murdaugh said that Curtis Smith showed up, shot him, but didn't shoot him cleanly and didn't kill him. Passers-by found Alex on the side of the road and took him to the hospital. Curtis told a different story. According to Smith, when they met on the road, Murdaugh was holding the gun himself. Murdaugh looked at him and said, "You going to shoot me?" And when Curtis refused, Murdaugh said, "Well, you have to do it." They wrestled for the gun, and it went off. Curtis didn't think anyone was actually shot by the bullet, so he got in his car and left. The cops ended up figuring everything out. They found the knife in the grass, they found DNA of both men on that knife, and eventually more and more evidence surfaced, and what happened became plain as day. Alex Murdaugh was arrested and thrown in jail, and he couldn't afford to post the $7 million bond that the court requested. Instead, he sat in jail facing 83 counts of fraud. He was accused of stealing more than $8.4 million from clients, and he was eventually indicted for the murders of his wife and son. At trial, the evidence against Alex Murdaugh was overwhelming. There are two things about the murders, however, that I don't think have been adequately explained, and I'm going to take a crack at both of them. And you should understand that I have absolutely no evidence for what I'm about to say. These are just my hypotheses. First, why kill his son and his wife? I think there are two reasons. Alex and Maggie Murdaugh were apparently living apart at the time of the murder. They were separated. Chances are Alex knew that divorce was a real possibility. And if there were divorce proceedings, Maggie's lawyers would be going through Alex's finances with a fine-tooth comb. There's no question that they would uncover that Forge account and learn about all the fraud. But I think there's also an emotional element. Maggie's emotions. Maggie would be devastated if her son was murdered, and it's likely that she, like all mothers, would never rest until she figured out what happened to her son. And Alex probably knew that Maggie's relentless pursuit of her son's killer would eventually lead her to him. Personally, I think that divorce was the primary motivation, but the whole mama bear thing simply must have been in the back of his head too. The second unanswered issue is the whole two-gun thing. Why kill these two people with two separate guns? Well, that seems to be about the alibi. Murdaugh would later argue that there were two shooters. It didn't work out. On March 2nd, 2023, the jury rendered their decision. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. Alex Murdaugh showed little emotion when the verdicts were read. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences. Later that year, he pled guilty to cheating clients in his law firm out of millions of dollars, and yes, he was disbarred. Oh, and all of his accomplices went to jail too. Alex Murdaugh was born into American aristocracy. He was a part of the ultra-privileged class who believed he could do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and that there would never be any consequences. Maybe it was his boredom that led him to steal. Maybe it was his opioid addiction. Or maybe he was just a privileged little shit who thought he'd eventually get out of any trouble because of his name. Or maybe that's all true. Alex Murdaugh can ponder that for the rest of his life from his jail cell. A crazy story for sure, and it's a story that's going to be told over and over again for many years. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please don't forget to rate the podcast, give us some stars, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Oh, and Haley, drive carefully.